Hello, friends. Welcome back to Better on Purpose. Thank you for pressing play today. Every week, I get the opportunity to sit down behind this microphone and talk through something I've been learning, wrestling with, or simply paying a little more attention to in my own life. And every week, I'm reminded that these conversations only become conversations because you choose to listen. So before we jump in today, I just wanted to say again, thank you. It truly means more than you probably realize. Today's conversation is about something I've been learning to practice over the past few months. It's maybe a simple practice, really, but it's not always easy. And it's been helping to change the way I experience my everyday life. Not because life suddenly became easier, and definitely not because I suddenly became an optimist. If you know me personally, you already know that one's probably not true. But something has changed. I've been thinking a lot about why. I've realized lately that our lives are really just a collection of moments. Some are big, but most are incredibly ordinary. And if I asked you to think back on yesterday, you could probably tell me a handful of things that happened. Maybe there was a really meaningful conversation, or maybe there was one that left you frustrated. You might remember getting stuck in traffic, or finally crossing something off your to-do list that had been hanging over your head for weeks, or laughing at something your child said, enjoying dinner with someone you love, or catching a beautiful sunset on your drive home. Or maybe yesterday felt completely ordinary. No big highs, no big lows, just another day, just life. But here's what's interesting. Yesterday wasn't made up of 5 moments. It was made up of hundreds, maybe even thousands. And somehow, only a few of them are the ones that stay with us. I've been really fascinated by that lately. Why those moments? Why do some moments linger while others disappear almost as quickly as they happen? Why can we have one difficult interaction replay in our minds all day long, while 10 really kind interactions quietly fade into the background? Why does one inconvenience feel bigger than everything else that happened that day? I most definitely don't have all the answers, but I have been wondering how much of the life we experience is shaped not only by what happens to us, but by what we repeatedly pay attention to. Because I think those are two different things. Now, if I'm being honest, I've never naturally leaned toward looking for the good. I've always been much better at preparing for what could go wrong. I know I'm not the only one that can relate to this, but my brain has always been really good at imagining worst case scenarios. I often rehearse conversations that haven't happened. I tend to attempt to solve problems that don't even exist yet. I'm really good at convincing myself someone's upset with me before they've given any real reason to believe that they are. I know. Sounds fun, right? The thing is, worry doesn't usually feel like worry when you're doing it. It almost feels responsible. Like maybe you're preparing. Like somehow, if I can think through every possible outcome, maybe I'll be ready if something goes wrong. Except when I stop and really think about it, more often than not, the things I've spent the most time worrying about have never actually happened. Or they've happened completely different than I imagined, or they happened and somehow I discovered I was much more capable of walking through them than I ever gave myself credit for. And yet, I still catch myself doing it. maybe you're the same way, or maybe worrying isn't your thing. What a joy that would be. Maybe your tendency is comparison or perfectionism. Maybe it's replaying conversations over and over and wondering if you said the wrong thing, or it's focusing on everything that's left to do instead of everything you've already accomplished. It could be assuming people are thinking the worst about you. Whatever it is, I think most of us have a lens we naturally look through. And after enough time, we stop realizing we're wearing that lens. For me, that lens has usually been worry. I'm very anxious by nature. And several months ago, I found myself in a really heavy season of life. It wasn't because of one big event. It was kind of an all-encompassing type of thing, like several different areas of my life became difficult around the same time. Some disappointments, some uncertainty, some things I could not fix, some questions I didn't have the answers to, a lot of old traumas, and then there were shifts in multiple relationships. And what had always been my natural tendency just got louder. It was almost like someone had reached over and turned the volume up on my worrying. I found myself waking up expecting the next hard thing, almost looking for what might go wrong and collecting evidence that life was difficult. And here's what I've realized looking back. It wasn't that there wasn't any good. There was plenty of it. I just wasn't seeing very much of it. Not because it wasn't there, because my attention had become consumed somewhere else. And I know I'm not alone in that. I think when life gets heavy, many of our brains naturally begin scanning for the next problem. Almost as if finding it first will somehow soften the blow. But instead, it may just keep us from noticing everything else that's also true. I remember reaching this point where I was just tired, not just physically, maybe even more so mentally and emotionally. I remember thinking, I'm so tired of experiencing my life this way, not because everything around me was falling apart. I knew that I was very blessed and fortunate in so many ways, but because I realized how much of my emotional energy was being spent anticipating problems that hadn't even happened yet. And I remember thinking, there has to be a better way to move through life than this. I wasn't expecting a perfect way, not a completely worry-free way, just better. I had no idea at the time how much I was going to need that thought in the very near future. But before any of that unfolded, there was one Sunday morning, one completely ordinary Sunday morning that quietly changed the direction of my attention. And it all started in the Starbucks drive-thru. I can remember that Sunday morning so clearly. It wasn't some life-changing day. It wasn't where one of those moments that everything suddenly clicked. Honestly, it started like so many Sunday mornings had before. My kids and I were butting heads before we'd even been awake for very long. And to be fair, none of us are really morning people. We're all much happier humans in the afternoon than we are first thing in the morning. So if you catch us before everyone's fully awake, there's a decent chance someone's going to be a little grumpy. Probably mostly me. That moment, that morning just happened to be one of those mornings. We were bickering, everyone was irritated, and I don't even remember what we were arguing about. Sometimes the things that consume us in the moment are the very things we cannot even remember a week later. But in that moment, it felt big. And I remember pulling into the Starbucks drive-thru thinking, goodness, we have only been awake for like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. And I had this realization that I did not want the first hour of my morning to determine how I experienced the rest of my day, because I think we've all done that before. One frustrating interaction and suddenly we're short with the next person. One stressful meeting and somehow the rest of the afternoon feels heavy. One unexpected bill, and now maybe we're convinced everything is going wrong and how am I going to manage this? It's amazing how quickly one moment can become that lens through which we experience the rest of the day. And sitting there in that drive-through, I remember having this quiet conversation with myself. It was not out loud, just in my own head. And it was, there has to be more to today than this. Taryn, look for the good, like find something good. And when I say look for the good, I'm not talking about pretending that difficult things don't exist. I'm talking about intentionally giving the good enough attention that it doesn't get drowned out by everything that is hard. So it wasn't because I thought looking for the good would magically fix the morning. I wasn't expecting my girls to suddenly stop arguing. I wasn't expecting all of us to become cheerful morning people. I just didn't want this to become the whole story. That was it. I didn't want it to become the whole story. So I pulled up to the window and the barista handed me my coffee and she looked me in the eyes and she said, "I hope you guys have the best day." Now, if you've ever been to Starbucks or most anywhere with customer service, you know they say kind things a lot of the time. That's part of the gig, right? And Starbucks and a lot of other coffee places, they write little messages on cups all the time too, right? This wasn't some extraordinary event. That barista probably treated the customer in front of me with the same exact kindness, and most likely the person behind me. But here's what's interesting. That morning, I noticed it. And as I drove away, I looked down at my coffee cup and saw that she'd written "Happy Sunday" with an exclamation point and a cute little smiley face. And I unexpectedly got emotional. Not because she'd done anything extreme or drastically different, but because in that moment, it felt like exactly what I needed. It felt like someone had interrupted the story I was telling myself, almost like a little reminder. Hey, there's still kindness here too. That one interaction did not erase the hard morning, but it reminded me the hard morning wasn't the only thing happening. We were headed to church, oddly enough. Like, who wants to walk into church carrying that? And when we arrived, I noticed things I honestly don't know I would have noticed otherwise. The flowers outside had started blooming, these beautiful purple flowers, bright colors that hadn't been there the week before. I noticed the birds chirping, and I noticed the sunshine and Mount Rainier standing so clearly in the distance, which is one of my favorite things. I actually stopped and took pictures, which isn't unlike me. And I remember thinking, how many mornings like this have I walked right past? Not because that barista had kind words for us. Not because Mount Rainier had decided to show herself for the very first time. Those things had been there all along. I just don't always pay attention to them. And that's something that I've been wrestling with ever since. How many good things quietly exist around us every single day that never become part of our experience because our attention is completely consumed somewhere else? That's become the practice. When life gets hard, I now try to remind myself not to let this become the whole story. And before I go any further, I just want to be really careful here. I'm not talking about pretending those difficult things don't exist. I'm not talking about toxic positivity. I definitely understand not everything is always sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes it is. I'm not talking about smiling through pain or acting like everything's okay when it isn't. That's not what this is. There are seasons where life is genuinely heartbreaking, where the grief is real and the uncertainty is real, the diagnosis is real, where the relationship really is struggling, where the financial stress is real. Looking for the good doesn't erase any of those things. It simply refuses to let those things become the only story, because two things can be true at the same time. You can be walking through something really hard and still experience kindness. You can be grieving and still laugh with a friend. You can be overwhelmed and still notice a beautiful sunset on your drive home, or you can have a really rough morning and still receive encouragement from a stranger holding a coffee cup. The hard doesn't disappear, but neither does the good. Sometimes we just have to remember to look for it. I remember another moment a couple weeks later after the Starbucks incident. I picked up a screw in one of my tires. And if you've ever bought tires recently, you know they're not cheap. And the tire place told me it wasn't one that they could just patch and repair. We were going to need to get new tires, and so we needed to get the car aligned before replacing the tires. And the alignment appointment wouldn't be for another 2 weeks. So there I was, stopping to fill my tire with air twice, not once, twice a day, every day. And I was irritated. Every single time I pulled into the parking lot, I was thinking, this is so inconvenient. This is going to be expensive. What if the tire doesn't make it until after the alignment appointment? Again, my attention immediately went to every single thing that could go wrong. And then one afternoon, I was standing there putting air in the tire, and I caught myself again. Another thought crossed my mind. There was a time in my life when replacing a tire would have been overwhelming financially. Not inconvenient, overwhelming. There was a season when I would have wondered how we were going to pay for it, where I might have even borrowed money or delayed replacing it simply because there weren't any other options. I realized I wasn't standing there because I couldn't solve the problem. I was standing there because I had to wait to solve it. That's different. Was it still frustrating? Absolutely. I'd still rather spend money on almost anything besides tires. But in that moment, I could see something else that was also true. I was incredibly fortunate to be in a position where the solution already existed. It just required patience. Nothing about my circumstances changed, only my perspective did. And that Sunday, a few months back at the Starbucks, wasn't some magical turning point where I suddenly became someone who always looked on the bright side. I wish I could tell you that from that day forward, I never spiraled again, that I stopped worrying, that I was always someone who saw the good first. That's not what happened. In fact, life actually took an unexpected turn and got harder for me just a few weeks later. I had been doing pretty good at looking for and finding the good for a bit. And then I suddenly found myself in a season where I was slipping right back into old patterns. The worrying got loud again. Disappointment got loud again. I found myself anticipating the worst, collecting evidence that things were falling apart, and forgetting everything I'd started practicing, which honestly is how growth usually works. It's very rarely a straight line. We take a few steps forward and then something happens and we find ourselves reaching for what's familiar. Again, we're creatures of habit. I don't think that means we failed. I believe that it just shows we're human. And here's what I've also come to realize. That Sunday morning had planted something. It was almost like I discovered a different way to move through life, not a perfect way, just a more intentional one. And instead of automatically giving all of my attention to what was wrong, I just started asking myself, what else is here? What else is true? What am I not noticing? Those questions have become incredibly important to me because every single day gives us evidence for all kinds of stories. Evidence that people are selfish, evidence that people are kind, that life is unfair, but also that life is beautiful. There's evidence that things are falling apart in some ways, but there's also evidence that things are being held together. And it's just not whether any of those things exist, they all do. The question is, what am I collecting evidence for today? Some of you may have seen me sharing little moments on my social media accounts that I've called worth noticing. Some of them have flowers or the mountain or the light coming through the trees, little precious moments with my kiddos, things that on the surface probably seem really ordinary. And what you may not know is those posts didn't start because I just wanted or needed something to post. They started because I needed something to practice. I needed to train myself to slow down long enough to notice what I would have otherwise walked right past. And something really interesting happened. The more I practice noticing, the easier it's become to notice. Again, life is not suddenly super easy. It's because my attention has slowly been changing. And that's what I've been learning, is that looking for the good does not change reality. It changes the way we experience reality. The Starbucks coffee didn't fix my morning. The flowers didn't erase all the stress. The new tires didn't magically become free. And the good didn't remove the hard. It simply reminded me the hard wasn't the whole story. So maybe that's the invitation today. Not to become an optimist overnight. Wouldn't that be nice? And some of you very well may be. That's not my story. It's not to stop worrying forever. A little bit of worry can be, just a little bit of worry can be good. It's just to practice. Practice asking yourself what else is true, what else happened today, what else is here. Maybe it was a conversation that encouraged you. Maybe someone simply held the door open, Maybe your child made you laugh, or dinner turned out better than you expected. Or maybe you made it through the day you weren't sure you could. Maybe the only thing worth noticing today is that you kept showing up. That's enough, because becoming better rarely happens in giant leaps. It usually happens in small moments of intentional practice. One day at a time, one moment at a time, one decision at a time, to keep on looking for the good. We're not pretending life isn't hard. We're just refusing to let the hard become all that there is that we're noticing. So as we wrap up today's conversation, I first just want to thank you again for showing up to listen today. I also want to mention that I never want to rush past how grateful I am that you choose to spend a little bit of your week here. I really don't take it for granted. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to encourage you to try something this week. At the end of each day, ask yourself one simple question. What was worth noticing today? Don't overthink it. Don't look for something extraordinary, although you can make note of those things too. Just look for one thing, one reminder that there was more to your day than the hardest moment you experienced. I hope you find something worth noticing this week. And until then, take care, friends.